Our theme for our devotion today is that God is the unshakable refuge. Our text is Psalm 11, which I encourage you to read in its entirety. It's not that long, it's just 7 verses. But it begins, "In the Lord I take refuge." How can you say to me, "Flee like a bird to the mountains"? Have you ever been wrestling with an important decision and had people give you advice, and that advice actually wasn't necessarily the best advice or what you really needed to hear or to know? That's kind of the situation here in Psalm 11. We're told this is a psalm of David, it's attributed to David. And you can picture David as a king having many advisors and being in a situation with enemies and threats. And at least someone is saying to him, "Why don't you just run away? Just run away, flee, go to the mountains, go hide yourself." And the psalm is beginning with David refuting that approach to life. How can you say to me, "Flee like a bird to the mountains"? And he can say that because he takes refuge in the Lord. And we hear about the terrible situation because, again, all the way through verses 2 and 3, we're to hear this is the advice of the advisors. Look, the wicked bend the bow, they fitted their arrow to the string to shoot in the dark at the upright in heart. If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? And so their advice is, look, everything's falling apart, you're in danger, just run away. And David refutes that. And he refutes that in verses 4 to 7 and gives his response. And his response is to remind those who are encouraging him to run away when they're in a fearful situation that, there's a very different response to fear. And that response is not to run away, it's not to flee, it's to face whatever is causing us to be afraid. And David reminds them, hey, the Lord is in his holy temple, which is a way of saying God is still present in our midst. And the Lord's throne is in heaven, which is a reminder that God is transcendent, if you will, that God is above everything. And his eyes behold, his gaze examines humankind, that God is watching us all the time and tests the righteous and the wicked. And David says that God's soul hates the lover of violence. God hates the lover of violence, and that the wicked are going to suffer a terrible punishment, which is envisioned tragically like what we see with a wildfire, like our poor fellow citizens and sisters and brothers in California are experiencing in verse 6. A scorching wind will be their cup. For God loves righteous deeds. And there's this promise that the upright will behold his face. So when you're facing a fearful situation, remember what David says in Psalm 11. The answer isn't to run away. The answer is to take refuge in God and to trust that the God who is in heaven, the God who knows our hearts and our motivations, that God is an unshakable refuge for you and for me.